Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This is actually our last episode of a 2-episode week. This is actually coming out on a Wednesday, and this will be the new release date moving forward, just so everybody knows, every Wednesday right here on capesandtights.com. But for this episode, we have Fred Kennedy, Fearless Fred, who is a radio host, but also a comic book writer for the book Dead Romans over at, Image Comics that released back in March, with issues coming out in April and issues coming out May 24th, as well as a hardcover coming out here pretty soon from a Shadowline over at Image Comics. But we talked about, honestly, the first half an hour or so is talking about Star Wars. So if anybody's a big Star Wars fan, check that out. If not, fast forward a little bit until we get into talking about Dead Romans, which is talking about the artwork, Nick's work, Fred's work, all that stuff on there, as well as we finish off the episode talking a little bit about Mud 79, a fan-made Star Wars story, audio drama coming from Fred himself. It's available on Spotify, Apple, and all those major podcasting platforms. Speaking of that, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, in all your major podcasting platforms. 5 stars, please. But this is episode number 107 with Fred Kennedy, comic book writer and radio host. Enjoy, everybody. Welcome to the podcast, Fred. How are you this morning?
So good, man. So good. I'm coffeeed up and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I got my coffee. I live in Maine, so I got my, I always do this LL Bean free sponsorship right there on the podcast. It's always LL Bean.
I love the East Coast, man. My family's all from Nova Scotia, so it's very similar country.
My son's name is Nova, so there.
Right on. Right?
It's meant to be.
I'm sure it's about Nova Scotia too.
Yeah. And honestly, the funny thing is, this is my in-laws always afterwards, after I bought Nova #1 and things like that, they're like, "Oh, the superhero." I'm like, "No, actually, for a small split second when we were going to name my son, my wife and I were talking, and the name came up originally to name a girl. If we had a girl, it would be Nova. And then I said, you know what? Let's look at the history of Nova. Nova's actually traditionally, back in Scandinavian history, is a male name. And I said, well, let's use it as a boy name. Literally for 2-week span, the fact that Nova was a superhero lost my mind, train of thought. Completely didn't even. And so when I did, I was like, oh my God. But then I obviously went full force and full. I was like, oh yeah, that is that way. So I got a Nova tattoo, and I got Nova comics, and now anything that has the word Nova on it, I buy. So it's not because it's a superhero, but
my oldest, his middle name is Tyrell, from Chief Tyrell from Battlestar Galactica, my absolute favorite character on that show. I know that's wild. Nova's a awesome superhero. It's I've got a side character from a sci-fi show from the early 2000s. He doesn't know, but one day we're going to watch it. I'm just going to see if he notices. I'm not going to tell him anything. I'm just going to see if he notices,
He just pauses it and goes, really?
Really, Dad? He's a great character. He's the chief. He's a great character.
And that's the thing is too, for me, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for Marvel to put out, they're supposed to put out some special presentation Nova thing on Disney Plus at some point in the future, and part of me is I want it now, but the other part of me was I want to be able to watch it. He's 2 years old now, so I'm can you push it out maybe 4 or 5 years from now, so that he can actually sit down and watch it with me, and not just be oh, there's something on TV, I want to play my cars.
That is dope. The when you're trying to share those things with your kids, and I think that I pulled the trigger on Star Wars just a bit too early, the original trilogy. I think I pulled the trigger a bit early. But then Rebels came out at the perfect time for both my kids. And it's funny, they don't really have a big connection to the movies. They don't think of Star Wars as that original trilogy that we do. They think of Star Wars as Rebels. That's their Star Wars. And to be honest, I'm so glad it is, because I think Rebels is probably my favorite Star Wars. And that's including Mandalorian. Andor is a completely different animal. Andor and Rogue One are sort of their own little thing. But when it comes to Star Wars, it's that's what I always think about is that show. And my kids love it too. So that's their Star Wars, which is rad.
And I'm loving the fact that, I mean, it's funny how you mentioned Star Wars. So last week here at the podcast and on our website, we had Star Wars week, and we had a couple of guests, and we'll do it again next year. And so on. We did it 2 years ago, or last year, I should say. And last year, what we did, instead of having guests on, my former co-host and I just reviewed episodes 1, 2, and 3. And the idea was we'd get to 4, 5, and 6, and 7, so on and so forth. And he ended up moving to Indiana, and it all fell apart, and we ended up going to more of a guest model. But during that conversation, we basically said that we're always going to have this generation's version of Star Wars now that we get more. Like, it was just Star Wars, but then when the prequels came out and the sequels came out, it's always going to be that generation. So like, I'm excited to see, like, my son's generation of Star Wars is going to be probably something he watched on Disney Plus and not actually in the theaters, which is kind of a cool thing. I actually quasi forced him to watch Young Jedi Adventures the other day. I really wanted to watch it, but I was trying to justify watching like a really young kid. Like, my wife is sitting on the couch, like, what are you watching? I'm like, he wants to watch it. I promise.
I get this.
He wants to watch it.
I get that so much. I so understand that. I have done that exact same thing. Yeah, I get that for sure.
I'm so excited to watch it.
1, 2, and 3. Just yesterday was I was talking on the phone with my dad, and I realized like how harsh I was to that original trilogy, and having watched it again with my kids, I get more out of it. And I think that that the first one, the Phantom Menace, I think is so much stronger than I remembered it being. And I was so distracted because when it came out, I was like in my early 20s, and I was sort of riding that like, oh, I don't like Jar Jar Binks kind of bandwagon. And that's not, I'm not saying that's good. I never said anything online. I don't spread like anger online because I was never that guy. But like with my friends and I would talk, I'd be not the biggest fan of that. It was very distracting to me. But watching it again with my children, it's way better than I remember, especially Revenge of the Sith is a lot better than I remembered it being. Like, that opening star battle there's some like kooky elements to it.
Yeah.
But I still think it's better than I remembered it being. And I don't know if it's like age and hindsight makes me like it more watching it with the kids and seeing them like lose their mind to it. But also having watched the Genndy Tartarovsky like animated Clone Wars in between and the immediate setup to that. So when I watched it with my kids, we went through and we watched all the stuff in between. We sort of did it in chronological order, like over the course of a year, and that setup from the animated one to the live action, it's a seamless transition. It's like a Rogue One into Episode 4, it made me like it a lot more.
Well, it's Heather Antos is on for Star Wars Week, and she used to edit Star Wars comic books, and talking about people's preconceived, because it's such a big universe and there's just so much going on now with the High Republic books and all those stuff, and the fan fiction, and obviously you have a fan podcast coming out here, and we put into our minds what we want the next movie to be. And so like what we all wanted after the original trilogy coming into Episode 1, what we wanted to happen wasn't exactly what happened on screen for a lot of people. And so it automatically made people shit on it, and it was like, well, it was actually not a bad movie. It just wasn't the movie you were expecting. Totally. And that's where I think a lot of people like crap on that first, or that prequel trilogy, I should say.
Totally. And I do wonder if maybe the expanded universe novels are not symptom, but like one of the reasons for that is because when we read like the Heir to the Empire trilogy, and then you get the movies and they're completely different, but then they're not saying that one is canon and one is not. And it's like, well, you said this was canon, and for years we thought this was what it was, but then you're saying this is what it is. And I wonder if for the real hardcore Star Wars fans that had read all those books, if that confusion contributed to some of the anger. And that's possible. And I do think that that's the fairest sort of angle people can take for criticism, but there's no excuse for like the prototypical man baby Star Wars fan behavior, but I think that in going back like to the late 90s for that movie specifically, I think that argument can hold some water.
I thought I saw it was this morning or last night a meme that was like saying like, you guys, Disney ruined Star Wars, but then it was like the one below it. It says, "No, you did because you villainized and made people want to quit
Yes,
acting and all this other stuff. Like you're the one that actually ruined Star
totally
Wars."
did. 100%. I agree with that. It's really like this big self-fulfilling prophecy of these people just putting like wave after wave of negativity into the world, and then confused when negativity comes back to them. And it's like an Aesop fable, you
Hmm.
know? It's like this is you're literally reaping what you sow. There's all these ancient metaphors for exactly what just happened, man. So just like accept it. It's not for you. Shut your mouth and
Yeah,
move on. Like whatever.
exactly.
You have your story that you can have in your brain. Write it yourself. Do your own thing, you know?
I love, and you mentioned a more recent Star Wars shows is I felt like a Bill Buckner moment. You mentioned Jar Jar Binks, whereas I'm a
Yeah.
Red Sox fan, I'm in New England, and so when Bill Buckner was brought back to New England years and years and years later, and the crowd cheered him, and so on and so because he was villainized for years and years and years for missing the ball between his legs, and when Ahmed Best gets an opportunity to actually star in a TV show in a different role, it was almost like I don't know, the fans are so excited for him again because I feel like we're past that time where people were just shitting on him
I
because
think the
like
fans
because it
that were
was his
excited were,
fault.
yeah, the kids that grew up with him. Like we
Yes.
were talking about that generational thing. The little kids that loved Jar Jar Binks and had the T-shirts and the water bottle and all that stuff. Those are the kids that were excited. And now the older guys who are generally speaking, like seriously, it's my generation is the
Yeah.
worst for that. The guys that are my age are watching with their kids, being, I remember Jar Jar Binks, and it's like, yeah, but you were a jerk. You sent letters into like magazines about how awful he was, and literally, because that's what you did then. There wasn't like
Yep.
there wasn't the message boards that there are now. And it's like, and now you're all excited about it. And I do think that I remember seeing it was on IO9 in particular. There was an article, I think, and it was by Germain Lucier. I think that's his name. I think that's what his name is. And he wrote an article about how he feels bad about all the bashing of Jar Jar Binks that he did because all the stories about what happened to Ahmed Best came out. We all heard the stories about Jake Lloyd,
Yeah.
but we didn't hear so much about Ahmed Best. And it's like when all those stories, there is a genuine sense of humanity where you're like, that's a real person. And then you, I would like to think people can be reflective and maybe make a decision to be a better person, you
Mhm.
know?
Well, I feel
Yeah, it's
like
a,
for me personally, if so I'm trying to think of, so I'm 30, I'll be 37 next week, and I live in the same town, but I moved away in between. But I live in the same town when Star Wars Episode 1 was coming out. I just remember the gas station. You walked in there, and every freaking product, motor oil, basically had like Star Wars on it. It was like the biggest. That was like when pop culture was like, oh my god, for me, because it was literally everything in the store had it. They had standees and all kinds of stuff in there. But I wish that I would have said that if like it's not Ahmed Best's fault that Jar Jar Binks
yeah,
was not liked. It was obviously the creative team. Ahmed Best got the opportunity to star in a Star Wars. We should have all gone behind him, been like,
yeah.
we're going to support you because you got screwed, kind of thing, in that sense. But instead, we shit on him because he said the same thing we would all say. Oh, you want me to act in a movie with Star Wars? So where do I sign?
Yeah, it's
And
like
he
Ben
did
Affleck
that,
in
and we all shit
Daredevil.
on him. Yes.
Yeah, it's like he didn't write it. Like, stop being so angry at the guy who's the but it's like the double-edged sword. When you're the movie's great, you get all the praise, and the movie's bad, you get all the hate. So you're the figurehead. That's part of being the star of the movie, you know?
And I just
Yeah.
hate it because we were at a convention recently. You mentioned before we got on here talking about a convention or Free Comic Book Day and being at things, and it's like all these people who were in these, like I know like the local convention here in Maine that's coming up in October. We have a couple of like Jawas that were in like Mandalorian and Obi-Wan and stuff like that. Like really like background people are getting opportunities to get paid to get their
Yeah.
autographs and get signatures. I'm at best for years never could go to a convention basically and be or Jake Lloyd. Like think about what they could be doing right now at conventions because how big conventions are and signing autographs, but like they don't do that because or
Yeah.
Ahmed Best might do it now, but right after that they weren't doing that because they were like people would have thrown tomatoes at them, and I'm like that
So
sucks.
and they would have got cheered. Like I think that there's been a lot of there's a lot of comeuppance to that negativity, and I think
Yeah.
that's a good thing. Like I think the scene is getting a lot more
Mhm.
welcoming to people, and there's because people are more informed because of the internet, they're able to like realize the scene behind the scene kind of, and that makes me very happy. I think that's
Yes.
really good.
So
good.
speaking of that, you're a comic book writer now. Now you just call yourself a comic book writer, right? I mean, obviously
Yeah.
you're Dead Romans there. We'll get to Dead Romans in a second, but this Star Wars tangent I'm on, I'm pretty happy
I'm in,
about.
dude, I'm fully engaged. I love it. I'm in the
Uh,
trench with you.
but now you're writing comic books. Would you take so again, we're talking about the idea of in a universe that people are very picky and very particular about how they want things. If someone came to you not just because yes, you'd say yes because you'd want to write a Star Wars comic book. How difficult do you think would it be for someone to come to you and say, would you like to write a Star Wars comic book, and you do it and not get villainized for something you did wrong? Like, how do you think you'd handle writing a Star Wars
Oh,
comic book?
I'm very used to criticism.
Yes.
My day job is on the radio.
Yeah, so
I work on the radio, so I always talk to Adam Gorham is like one of my best friends. And so we talk about like the similarities between the broadcasting world and the comic book world. And like I marinate in hatred. Like I
mhm.
am fine with it. I get it. I deal with it. Doing a Star Wars comic and getting hated for it would be absolutely fine. I'm on there's a cartoon Total Drama Island, and I do a voice of a character on that show in the reboot, and he's like the worst character. Like it's such a great character for me as a like doing the voice work. I love doing it because he's so awful, and that's the funnest thing about it. But all of the hatred about the show invariably involves the character I play, and I get bleed over hatred about it all the time. And it's like, if anything, I have elicited a strong emotional response, meaning I have done my job.
Mhm.
So writing a Star Wars comic, I would die to write a Star Wars comic. And I've talked to friends that have, and they're like, it's a lot different than what you expect because there's like a whole like there's multiple layers of editorial you got to go through, and it's like I know, and I'm ready for it. I'll do it all. I don't care. I just want to do it to say that I did it. You know what I mean? So I would get on board with writing a Star Wars comic. I wish I could have worked with Heather
Yes.
when she was editing Star Wars, because I've worked with Heather before, and I think she's fantastic. Um, but I would love to do a Star Wars book for sure. Like Adam Gorham is doing that that Star Wars Darth Vader book right now.
Mm.
And I saw Pencils and Inks months ago, and I was like, I'm so mad I'm not riding this train with you, man. Because there's that one page that you're seeing going around where Vader is like just like full on like blowing things up using
Yeah.
the Force. He's losing control. And when I was looking at those pages, I was like, oh my God, this is everything that I've wanted to see for years. I'm so mad. I'm furious. Yeah, but yeah, it's good.
I mean, I always think one of those things is like the old Michael Jordan used to say, like he'd play basketball for free, because he just loves it so much or whatever. It's the same thing I feel like for a lot of people with some of these books. Like obviously you need to make a paycheck, you have a day job, so on and so forth. But if someone was like, we need you to write like a mini story in this anthology for Star Wars, we're not gonna pay you. You'd probably be like, yep, where do I sign?
Done.
How do I get
100%.
this?
Yeah, 100%. Dude,
I
I
think a
did it
lot of us would.
with the radio play, like with Mud 79. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I did. We can talk about that after,
Yes.
but I did that for free. I'm still in the process of doing that for free, and that is hundreds of hours of work. No one's paying me for that. I just love it so much.
And that's why we're a bunch of nerds. That's the other thing.
Totally. Like,
It's
yeah,
Star
like
Wars fandom, and that's one of those things that I'm putting together a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles week in August, and we're gonna talk to some creators and things like that too. But like, it's a little bit more of a pull to try to get content for me. I'm a big Turtles fan, but not as much as I am a Star Wars fan. I feel like I had too much content for Star Wars week, and I could have pulled some things back and wait till next year and so on. Whereas like it's just there's just I don't know TMNT, and then horror week. I'm doing a horror week in October, and that one's a little bit easier to pull things through. I don't know why I just got like this like gap in my mind with Turtles, but Star Wars was easy. Star Wars
yeah.
is one of those ones. There's just so much shit, and I have a whole entire bookshelf now of just High Republic books now because of all the books that came out, and then
Could
Star
you
Wars
imagine
comic
like a
books.
Turtle Star Wars crossover would
Oh,
be
they're
rad. I
doing
don't know if that's ever happened, but it would be
no.
pretty dope.
The two upcoming Turtles crossovers in comic books is Street Fighter, which is pretty badass,
Mhm.
and Stranger Things.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I was like, oh, they're first of all, love IDW, but I felt like it was like, okay, we're gonna take all of our intellectual property that we have right here and just start going like this with them and see what it sticks.
I'm such a like I feel like I've totally switched over when we're talking going back to
Yeah.
like the Star Wars thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm right now, I'm like, that's crazy. I love it. Let's do it. Like that's
Yes.
where I am now. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's beautiful. make it work. Like, let's just see how it all goes down. Yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
we live in a world of multiverses. You can do
Yeah,
anything. If it's under
do
the
it.
same banner, you might as well do it. There's no reason not to. I mean, they just did the TMNT Mighty Morphin Power Rangers crossover.
Yeah, that's
Spawn
another great
Batman.
one. Yeah.
Those ones are back. So this crossovers are easy. And you get two fandoms that go together in a way that, you get whatever artist wants to do it. Like Ryan Parrott did the TMNT Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which was amazing because his Mighty Morphin Power Rangers run is a beautiful, beautiful comic book. But yeah, it's a crazy world. But the problem with it is that Star Wars is such a like they're so particular over at Disney and Lucasfilm of what they do and what they can't do that it's just one of those things. Touching something else is going to be almost impossible for us to do anything else other than just what Star Wars proper is.
I'm a true believer. I believe they can pull it off, man.
You speak it out into the world and it will come,
Yeah,
right? You just say it out loud and
absolutely.
it will come. But well, obviously we could talk Star Wars forever. How about maybe you're a guest next year on Star Wars
Yeah,
just to shoot the
for
shit about
sure.
Star Wars.
I'll come on. Don't worry.
But Dead Romans. So you were a comic book fan before you started writing comic.
Yeah.
Obviously, you mentioned you're a Star Wars fan for a long time too. And so, how did you go from being a pop culture fan to writing a comic book in the first place? How did that transition happen?
It was 24-hour comic book day challenges. So what happened was, and this was like years ago,
Yeah.
there when I was living in Edmonton, there's a shop used to be called Happy Harbor, owned by Jay Bardila, and just a real champion of comic books. Like, comics are for everyone. Let's get
Mm-hmm.
everyone into the shop. And it was a really it was a polar opposite environment of like the androids dungeons Simpsons kind of world of like, you don't belong, it was very much like, oh yeah, you want to try this, you'll like this. And Jay is just a great human being, and I was on the air and I had just heard about Free Comic Book Day, and I decided I'll like get in touch with the shop, and then we talked about it on the air and I came down, and it was I the big book at the time was Why the Last Man was just
Mm-hmm.
wrapping up, because I read comics like in high school and in junior high over at the 7-Eleven on the spinner rack and stuff, but I'd fallen out of comics when I was starting out in broadcasting and was broke and had no money to buy
Mm-hmm.
anything. And then when I went there, like, I snagged a trade of Why the Last Man, and that led into in the back of that ads there was 100 Bullets, which was the book that really pulled me back into comics as like a guy in his mid 20s, back in, giving me that vibe that I had at like 13 14 years old when I was like super into it. um Getting like milk crates of like Conan comics from my buddy's
Yes.
older brother. That guy who had the black light posters, and so it's like, I got all the answers. That guy gave me a crate of Heavy Metal and Conan the Barbarian comics in junior high, and that was a big deal. But it gave me that feeling again, and so I went to the 24-hour comic book day challenge, and I did the comic book day challenge that year, and then I moved to Toronto the following fall. And this is going to sound kind of weird, but I was at a radio station event and Kevin Smith was there. And I had just finished Longbow Hunters. And when he was there and I talked to him, I'm like, hey, man, I love Longbow Hunters. And one day I'm going to write some comics too. And he like, it was awesome. It was such a great moment. We were smoking a doobie and he hands it
Yes.
back to me. And I'm holding it. And I remember I was holding it, and he goes, why aren't you writing comics right now? And I was like, why am I not writing comics right now? And so I started working on my first big indie book that Adam and I did together.
Mhm.
And it was called Teuton. And it was this like historical fantasy in Lithuania during the high medieval ages, during the Northern Crusades. And we brought in all these like mythic godlike characters, and the mortals are doing the machinations of the gods. And you don't know who's good and who's bad and who's really working against each other. And then we did 3 trades of it. It was a 300-page story, and we did it over the course of like 4 years, just on the side because he was
Mhm.
working, I was working. And that was really the beginning. And then I did a small press book called The Fourth Planet with Chapter House, which was a Canadian imprint. And I did it with this guy, Miko Maciejek, who's this Polish artist, Polish Canadian artist. And that's a book that I really would love to do. We ended up like, there was some issues with the publisher and the classic small publisher stories. And
Mhm.
It didn't last. And what's frustrating to me is like we built this really cool not fantasy, it was a sci-fi story, but it was like I'm not gonna lie, it was super artsy fartsy, and I was like really like doing something that was ethereal and out there and getting super like inside of my own head and philosophical, and I really loved it. I loved the book, and it was really well received, and I would always love to do it again, but it just didn't last. And when the pandemic happened, I was in the process of working on a few things, and then they all fell through with pencils down, and I completely gave up on comics. I like was totally wasn't going to do it, and that's when I started working on the radio play, the Mud 79, and I'd completely forgotten that right before the pandemic hit, I was working with Nick on the pitch pages for Dead Romans, and he was in the middle of working on two other things. And I gave him the money for the pitch, and that was it. I kind of like forgotten it. And then I got these disappointing emails, and there was three comics in particular that were really getting traction, and we were talking about specifics about scheduling and page rates and the rights and getting contracts and paperwork. But when it all imploded, I was really dejected, and I was really like I'd given up. I totally given up. And then I got this email from Nick that he had the pages done, and then I was like, okay. And then they were really, really good. They were really, really good. And I sent them to Kalman Andrzejowski, and I was like, what do I do with this? He goes, dude, you send it everywhere right now. He goes, you send it everywhere. And I'd sent it to, so the first place I sent it to, actually, I wanted it with IDW, is where I sent it to. And I got an email back, and it was a rejection. But what was good about the rejection was they actually read everything. Like they really did go through it. And she explained that it looks great. It's fantastic. She goes, the thing is that we don't know, like we're not clear about certain things with the characters and what's going to happen. And these were things that were included in the story. I just didn't include them in the pitch.
Yeah.
Because like I'm terrible at pitching. And so I took those notes that I got and I reworked the pitch, and then I sent it more places. And then it landed, and I really do have to credit the editorial team at IDW for their fantastic feedback. And then when I wrote back asking questions, because I was like, I'm not trying to change your mind, I'm just, if you could clarify this so that I can learn to be better for next time, I'd really appreciate it. And then they did, and I was like, I love that. I love it when people will just take the time to talk to you like a human being, and it's good if you're not like, you're not being abrasive with them. And so then I sent the pitch out for Dead Romans, and it's with Jim. He wrote back. I sent it in the morning. So what I did was, because I still wasn't confident about the pitch, is I just sent the pages. So I just sent the pages, and I said, "This is beautiful." And then he wrote back and right away, and it's like, "You don't need to tell me it's beautiful. I'll know if it's beautiful when I see the pages." And my reaction is, "Well, you really screwed that one up, Kennedy. You just did that. That's not happening." And I got a letter back later that day. It was, "This is beautiful. Send me everything you have." And I'm like, whew. So I sent him everything I had. And by the end of the day, we had a contract. Like it just went like that. And I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. So yeah, it was very quick once it happened. And Nick had to clear some stuff that he was working on off the table. And then we went straight ahead and we had the book. Yeah, and then here we are now.
It's almost like that email was originally like, oh God, another freaking comic book of someone's trying to tell me it's beautiful. Yeah. Send it back your initial reaction, like, don't tell me it's beautiful. And then all of a sudden you read it and you look at it, you're like, oh, never mind. Let me retract that really quickly. It is actually beautiful. It's a beautiful book. And so that's one thing. It's like, you're obviously the writer of the book. Nick's the artist of the book. However, last year I had Adam Caesar and David Stoll on, and one of the things that they did to talk about their book Deadball over at Dark Horse, that book to me was a visually stunning book. It's the same thing with this one. I picked this book up. A lot of times I'm picking books up based on recommendations from some PR people, based on seeing on the internet. A lot of times I'll look, Key Comic Collector has like a key independent books or key books that are coming up, and a lot of times things show up, and Dead Romans came up in one of those things. So I had, and again, it depends on the comic book shop of what people order. So like Dead Romans, for example, it's a book that I would say not every comic book shop across the country in North America ordered the book, just because of the fact of what it's based around, like with the historical part of it, all that stuff. In my local comic book shop, he knows his spot. He has 20 people on a pull list. We're a very small LCS in Bangor, Maine. And so he knows the spot. He knows where he needs to spend his budgeting dollars and so on and stuff. But so when I said, I want you to order this for FOC, he's like, I don't know, man. I'll order a copy for you. But then he ended up ordering 4 or 5 copies, which is a lot for his shop, just to let you know. And like when he put it on every week when he sends out the pull list, he puts a little thing on, he put it on there. He had more people order it. Than they had, so we had to order some more. But what I was saying, what I reasoned was like I read the book, I looked at the title, the synopsis, whatever. I opened the book up, I go, holy crap, I could just stare at this book for hours and hours and hours. And every single time I've read it since then, I've read issue 1 a couple of times, like just opening it up, I'm like, wow, it's just, I don't know what it is. It's just, it's something that that you don't normally see. I think it's part of it. It's dark but light. It's got grittiness and cleanness to it. It's got, I don't know, something about Nick's artwork. That's like, I'm now a Nick fan, forever. Like, it's like, I'm a fan
I'll
of
show
you
you
too.
some
But
inks
like,
when we're off air if you want to see some.
like, geez, it's like, oh my God, I just couldn't get over how much I love the visual aspect of it. Not to mention that story that went along with it, obviously. But you guys too, the story matched his artwork. And there's sometimes comic books out there when I'm looking at them, reviewing and talking about comic books, that it just seems like they grabbed, oh, you're an artist and you want to do this, cool, I'll grab you. Oh, and then they just, it doesn't mesh. And your story, Dead Romans, and Nick's artworks like seamlessly went together and made a perfect comic book. So
it had to, that story was super tight for me. Like, it was really close to my heart kind of deal. And I knew the art needed to be perfect for it to sell, because it is a hard sell, because of like what you said, it's, you see it and there's this idea that it is a historical fiction story, but it's not. It's really a love story in a horror setting is the best way to describe it for me. And because it is, and when I was at a show, Nick was tabling there and he had this book called The Voyager, and it was, when I remember when I saw it, I was like, that's the one. But I was terrified to talk to him because he's really good. And so who am I? I'm like, there's nobody. So I go up and I talk to him, like I soft sell him at the table. And then I messaged him later on. And when I messaged him, apparently, I didn't know this, but when he read my email, he was listening to a podcast about the history of Rome when he read the email. And he goes, it's like, it was fate. It's like, I knew I needed to talk to you about it. And so then I started talking to him about it. I'm like, let's go for drinks. So we went for drinks. And when we talked all about the intent, the setting, and just the real world horror that is at play in this book, because you're dealing with a story that's set in a swamp that's been like borderline flooded with rains. And so you're marching through this swamp and there's no lights. Like when it goes dark, it's dark. And then you're hiding in the mud, in the rain, getting eaten alive by bugs, listening to the screams of thousands of people around you being sacrificed and butchered alive, the dead and dying everywhere, because the Varian disaster is difficult to understand in terms of the scale today. And this happened 2,000 years ago. And you've got like 40,000 people getting massacred over 4 days, steady. It's just 100-kilometer stretch of death. And there's no phones. There's no radios. Nobody knows what happened. All you're doing is you know that everyone's dying around you and you better run. And then you take that setting, which is horrifying. Like it is as horror movie as you can get. And then you've got 2 people that are desperately in love trying to find each other amid this chaos. And I always draw the comparison to 28 Days Later, which I believe, again, at its core is a love story in a horrible setting. And I really think those moments where you're in these horrific scenarios really bring out the best and the worst in people. And that scene at the end of the movie is one of my favorite scenes in movies, where she's looking in his eyes, trying to figure out if he's got the rage virus because of how brutal and savage he was. But that wasn't the rage virus. That was just him trying to get to her and save her, you know? It's like those elements are firmly at play in this story. And when when like I've heard people like, so what's it about? I'm always like, well, it's like a horror setting with a love story. And like, really, I'm like, it makes sense when you read it. You gotta understand what I'm trying to say here. But and with Nick's art, I really feel like that opening scene, like the opening 9 pages of this book, it really is a micro of the macro, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because you've got these two characters that are just so in love, like hopelessly in love, saying dumb, unrealistic, implausible things, living in the like, you know what it's like when you're hoping like, I'm gonna give you the world, I'm gonna do
Yeah.
everything for you, I'm gonna make all these things happen for you. And then, yeah, but this is the reality. And then reality starts flooding in. And that moment where he's like, he's looking out into the, because he knows what's in the woods, he
Yep.
knows what's coming. And he looks back at her and he's like, the land hates us. He's like, you've got like, trust me, bad things are about to happen. And when he gives her that sword, it was like, I got really like, you gotta understand, Nick. It's so symbolic. Like, it's important that he's giving her his sword, the sword that like saved his life thousands of times, that has gotten him through thick and thin. He gives it to her. That is him giving her everything right there. Like, and then we're like, and it's like his manhood, the symbolic symbol of manhood and the sword and the phallic imagery, and he's giving it to her. And I'm like, she owns it. She owns it. And I was like, we're like, no one's gonna pick up on any of this. I'm like, but we are, Nick.
Yes.
That's what matters, is that we
And if one
understand it.
person does, we did our job.
I'm sending this to my high school English teacher and say, I was paying attention, Miss Blewett. I was listening. I was paying attention. It's all right there. Yeah, that's an English teacher. That's a teacher that made a massive impact on my life and the way I looked at stories with Miss Blewett. She's
I like how
fantastic.
you're saying you're my thought is whenever I have something successful now, I look back to the teachers who didn't think I was gonna be successful and be like, haha,
Yeah,
screw you.
yeah, yeah,
You're more like, thank you. I appreciate it. I was
yeah.
listening.
You were so great. I was paying attention. Queen Mab and Romeo and Juliet. I got it. I understood what was happening. I did. I swear.
Well, I think you said that it's trying to hard to sell someone on it in the same sense that there's so much out there right now. It's nice to have something that's based in a different
Yeah,
time and age. I mean, I feel like there's just I'm a big horror comic book fan now, and I wasn't a horror fan at all. Like I barely saw any horror movies. I didn't read. I live in Bangor, Maine, and that's where Stephen King is, and didn't read horror novels and all this other stuff. And then when there's like a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, when some of these new horror books came out and something like that, I mean, it's hard for people to see who are not watching, but I have Something's Killing the Children right here, one of the great
yeah,
horror books right now, and that horror aspect's great, but then they're basically all set in the same place. It's like modern day, United States of America or North America or wherever, and it's just a horror. It's some sort of horror story with some sort of supernatural element to it, and it's like
yeah,
having a horror story, love story based in Roman times. It is this. It sets it apart, like in that sense that it's hard sometimes to sell, and that's maybe why you got some rejections to the idea that like mostly hard for us to sell. And the point of comic books is for a
yeah.
publisher to sell your comic book. But in the same sense, I feel like to me it seems like an easier sell because like it stands out from the rest. You want something different? Here
Totally.
you go.
You
This is what
want
you need
something
right now.
adjacent. I think that was the message
Yes,
that people
yes.
were saying without saying, was that they wanted something adjacent that could sit on the shelf next to something else. That was one of the things that we got from, I think it was Skybound, was saying that it was difficult to sell historical fiction.
Mhm.
And I wasn't like, you don't understand, you don't get what I'm doing, but I was very much like, I get it. I do. I just really believe in it, and I'm
Yep.
very fortunate that Shadowline believed in what we're doing. And I don't want that to seem like I'm slagging Skybound at all. I
No.
am a huge diehard Invincible fan for life. But for me, like this was a story that I really wanted to do. I've talked about, I grew up in Belgium, and we lived by a bunch of like, well, not lived by, but we could take a bus ride and go to like
Yes.
Roman ruins. And there was this one recreated village. And that was really sort of like the impetus that set me on the path, because it was a battle that was mentioned in Julius Caesar's war diary about fighting the Belgii. And so I was like, ooh. And then you see these things and you're like, that was a real thing that really happened right here. And so that was this fascination with Rome. I've always thought that doing a story about Rome would be dope. And when I talked to Nick about it, Nick got like, you don't understand. He goes, Rome is like the artist's dream. He goes, all of these ideas of iconic imagery
Yep.
That's sort of like the beginning, and the visuals at play with the idea of Rome and the pomp and the circumstance. It is empire, you know? And
Hmm.
you see that weaving its way through, even going back to Star Wars, like Star Wars, like the empire is the empire, the emperor is the emperor, you know?
Hmm.
And so doing a story about Rome was pretty rad. And then getting into the tribal nature of the story with the different Germanic peoples and the berserkers, which is you have seen some stuff because issue 2 you've seen we're pulling back the curtains. I really like there's a lot of foreplay in this book, is how I say. There's a lot of foreplay, and that final close, those closing pages of issue 2, when you really see the wolves are gathering,
Yep.
and it's like when they're talking about we're here because they want us here, and then it pulls back and you see like the war, you don't even see them. This negative use of negative space is
Yes.
unbelievable. Like, and I think that's terrible. It's that Jaws idea of you don't show the monster, but out in the shadows you see the eyes of the and the spearheads coming through the woods, and it's like, what's there? Tune in next week. Same Roman time, same Roman channel.
Luckily, I have been able to see issue 3 already. So
Yeah.
just say, I don't like to rub that in that much when I talk to when the people listening, because they're like, screw you. Because every once in a
Yeah.
while I don't get it. And then someone talks about being able to see it the whole time. And I'm just like, I cannot wait. And they like literally not even off recording. They're like, I'm staying tight lipped. I'm like, you suck.
So, you know, the and I don't want anybody who hasn't
Yeah.
read it to think that there's no like big action pieces in the
Yes.
first 2 issues. There is. There's tons of it, but it's like there's that movie 13 Assassins
Mhm.
by, I think it's Takahashi Miike. But the idea of it, it's this building, there's action throughout, but there's no like that. It's just like
Mhm.
straight up the whole way, and that's how the story goes. And we're the last like 30 pages of the book. You're gonna close it, and you're gonna be like, you're gonna need a smoke like when you're
Yeah.
done. Like, it's really good.
Yeah.
I'm stoked for people to see it, and I have to give credit to our editor Allison O'Toole.
Yes.
She has been phenomenal to work with, because specifically because like being a new creator, like at this level, you've been throwing so much at the wall, you get gun shy about putting it all out there and really running with your idea. And she was like, no, you have to, you're here now, you've got to run with it, take it as far as you can. And she made me believe in my ideas more. And there were some things that I didn't have in the story at first, that I didn't wasn't confident in myself enough as a writer to do. And she was there telling me to do them, which
Do them.
was
Yeah.
the most fulfilling experience of the whole process, was working with somebody like Nick and Allison. Have been incredible resources to me. And with Nick now, like we're just really on this wavelength of like a creator duo, where there's sometimes my like description of what is happening is like a sentence, but my intent of emotion is just like metal, just make it metal, and then this is happening and throw this in there. And he's like, and he highlighted a panel description for the final issue and sent it to me like last week. He goes, this is the best description of a panel I've read in a long time. I'm like, it's happening. Fuck yes, it's
Yes.
happening. It's happening
Yes.
right now. And then he's like, goes, I know, I'm so stoked. I'm like, I'm so sorry about that. He goes, no, I love it. I love it.
And that's issue 6. You have a final issue 6. This is a 6 issue series.
Yeah.
You know, it's awesome to see that. In a sense, we get more to live in this unit, this world that you've created. But like, you see that it's different than what most people have been doing nowadays. A lot of these series, at least, they're doing 4 issues even as a mini series. What led to having? Is it just too much story to tell? You needed 6 issues, or is it just what Shadowline wanted? How did it end up with 6 issues?
It was originally 12. Like we wrote
Okay.
it as a 12 issue series. And so we wrote it as 12. And then Jim didn't say no to 12. He didn't
Okay.
say no to 12. He said, let's do 6 and let's see how it goes. And I think that it's the same thing. Like there is a hesitancy to commit to a big run when
Mm-hmm.
I'm new. Nick is like, Nick is Nick, but he hasn't done a lot of comics in
Mm-hmm.
a while. He's been doing a lot of indie book, paid book, and stuff like that. And we'll see. And
Yeah.
so we had to change the way the story was written. But we have a second arc done. So we shifted to do just the 6-issue run. 6 issues, that opening story, this is it. But there is another 6-issue story that we're kind of working on because there's a chance that we're going to do the second run. There's a chance right now that we're going to do that second arc. And I can't say what that's about without giving away stuff that happens here. But I can say that it would be me, Nick. It'd be the exact same team.
Okay.
So it would be literally just a continuation, and I think it would scratch a lot of itches that people have because there are a lot of things that we have purposely not left unfinished. Everything wraps. We're not throwing a bunch of like this might happen, and that's not happening in this story because that's one of my big pet peeves.
Peeves,
Like it's
yes.
all it is. It's all in there. It's all there. The whole story. There's no like we show one thing happen and then we don't resolve it so we can do it later. No,
Yeah.
it's all done. Everything
Yeah.
gets done. But there is a definite second half of the story that you could wonder about
Mhm.
that we're gonna hopefully get into in a second arc. We pitched it as the 12, and then we dialed it back and we did 6 because I had in my head when I was putting it together and plotting it out, I kind of like realized there's a pretty good possibility you're just going to do half the story.
Mhm.
So we did 6 22-page issues is the full run of Dead Romans. And
And
with
that's
the
and
heart, yeah.
I'm not upset with that in the sense that like I don't know. This is nowadays there was a shift between ongoings, like just you created a comic book and you just kept it going until they canceled it, and then they shifted to this more mini series, maxi series stuff, and it seems like there's a little bit more transition back, a tiny bit transition back to ongoings. There's a few more books that are coming out nowadays that are more of an ongoing, like they just don't have an end. But I am huge and like I have no issue with the idea with the idea being 1 through 6. And then if it works out well, getting 6 more issues. I'd rather have that happen and have you be able to plan that than have it be like, oh, we're gonna do 12, and after 8, Shadowline and Image and all them are just like, it's not selling that much. We're going to cancel it, and you not get to finish your series. You know what I mean? Like, I'd
Yeah,
rather have it be a mini series that gets a second volume
totally.
than it be a longer series that gets cut short and you have to force it into. I mean, Kyle Starks had to deal with that. With I Hate This Place. He had planned it to be a 15-issue series, and Skybound ended up only giving him 10 or 12. And so he had to force the last arc into the middle, like to push it all in. And he says it fit and it worked, but it's just like if he would have known that, he would have potentially written a little differently
Yeah.
going into that. So
I planned it out because I'm so used to rejection. I
Mhm.
planned it out so that I would only do half. So it was very easy to just like, well, I've got it all ready to go. So I knew there were some issues because the opening of the story was initially it opened with a conversation of people talking about what had happened, and then that transitions into the story kind of like peters out and into now it's
Yeah.
just happening, and the implication is that it is all just being retold from multiple perspectives,
Mhm.
and then the second arc is that conversation in its time and then continuing on from there. So that was the intent, and if we do the second arc, it will still be in those time
Mhm.
frames, but that conversation aspect won't necessarily be included.
Yeah.
So, but you'll know when it comes out because we've talked about this. You'll know, you should be able to figure. I think this was, and I'll tell you that, yeah, that was it. I'll let you know.
So the series has been out for a few weeks now, months now. So we have issue 1 dropped March 22nd, and then you obviously had an issue 2, which is on the wall behind me for those watching. It came out a couple weeks ago, April 26th, and we have another issue. The third issue comes out May 24th. So,
My birthday. That's
oh, look
right.
at
Yeah.
that! See,
I'm
May
so
birthday, May
excited.
birthday.
Yeah.
We knew this
It's a
kismet
beauty.
right here,
Yeah.
right?
But
And so that's great. And then obviously, I'm guessing at the end of this, will be the volume 1 will be probably collected into a trade of some sort.
yeah, you can
That's the
order
hope.
the hardcover right now. The hardcover is
Okay.
available for order right now. I have seen the stuff in the hardcover, and it is unbelievable because we have put together like a wild list of variant covers, and
Mm-hmm.
like Jose Villarrubia, who does colors in the book, his variant for the final issue has variants from Mike Del Mundo, I know you're excited.
I'm excited.
Jose Villarrubia, as well. Miko Maciejczak, who I did The Fourth Planet with, did a variant cover for us. Adam Gorham did one. Carrie Nord did a cover. Kalman Andrzejowski's got one coming. Kyle Charles, Sanya Anwar. It has been like an amazing list of people to work with, because all the friends that I've made and all the people that I've like wanted to work with, I was very keen to like do some tugging on the cape. Val DeLandro's cover, I think, is on issue 3, and his cover is so cool. Like, it's just this really unique, powerful image, and it's all gonna look really great. And all those covers are gonna be included in the hardcover, and yeah, so I'm really stoked. So I think that you'll really like what's coming. It's a very cool looking book.
It's visual, like I said. If people don't even like this, I don't want this to sound like a diss to you, Fred, but like if people don't even like the story, and you'll probably admit to this too. If people don't even like the story, at least buy it so you can look at it. Like, that's like
100%. Like, and I have books that I'm not a big fan of the story. I just love the way that they look. We've all done that. And then there's books that are the opposite that I'm like, oh, I wish you'd gotten a different artist. Like we talked about, I just grab this artist and throw them in there. So, sometimes it's like if one of my friends is up for a book and then they don't get it, they go with another artist, I'll buy the book just to read it and be like, they should have gone with
the other person.
Yeah, my friend would have done such a better job. Oh, they're my friend. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah,
but what I also love about these kind of things too is that, like, when you read a book like this, and the number of books that I read because of the podcast and the website, but also just because I'm a comic book fan, is I tend to find, like, I didn't know Nick, and this is going to be a great, awesome future, because no matter what Nick does, I'm going to probably buy just because of this one book. And that's just cool about working with people like talented creators on both sides of things, is like, but now you're hopefully lucky enough that whenever you do a book, Nick's going to be along for the ride. So
I was like gushing about, there's this French artist, Frank, it starts with a B. He's always posting images of these big ships and stuff. He has all these incredible, like, black and white washings with these ships crushing through waves, the spray, the rigging, and all that. And then I posted it, and Nick responded, that is so beautiful. And I'm like, we're going to put boats in the next book, buddy, so you can show this guy how it's done. He's like, I love drawing boats. I'm like, I'm going to squeeze them in somehow. There's going to be some ships and some storms and some rigging, and we're going to make it work. Somehow it's going to be in the book.
Some dream sequence, even. It wasn't even actually part of the thing. It's just someone goes, and you had this like nightmare with boats and stuff in it, and then it goes back to the normal story.
I'm going to do that. There's going to be a symbolic boat dream is what it's going to be. Symbolic boat dream.
Boat is like flowing down a river, or I don't know, something along those lines. But yeah. So Dead Romans is awesome. I really recommend it. Great story. Like I said, the horror love story part of it, but also the Roman aspect of it is completely in the comic book universe, but different. And that's one of those things that whenever I talk to my day job, talking to people about comic books, they're always just in their mind picturing Looney Tunes or like Spider-Man animated TV show. Like, they just don't picture what we could actually get out of comic books nowadays. That this, like, most people just picture this story you're telling as a novel and not as a comic book. And it's like, no, comic books, there's such a variety of comic books out there. There is literally something for everybody. And I don't think people understand that. So that's what I love about this book too, because it's in that realm. But like, if you don't like capes and tights, if you don't like the superhero aspect of things, check this out, because this is a different story being told. And that's what I love about it too. So you grab that. I'm hoping that your local comic book shop is sold out of all these things, people. But if it's not, grab it. And I don't know if it's available for any of the issues are available for, but if you don't worry, the hardcover you can pre-order right now.
We just did the reprint of issue 1.
Okay.
So the reprint of issue 1 is out there, and it's got 2 exclusive covers for the reprint. And then there is issue 2 is out, and I was at Gotham Central here in the GTA on the weekend, and they still had a few copies of issue 2. I don't know if they have any left right now, but issue 1 did really well. It sold out, got reprinted, and so issue 2 is doing quite well. So there's still, the FOC is done for issue 3 actually. But there should be some. Get in on issue 4. You can figure it out. Yeah.
Well, there's always the resale markets out there and things like that. There's someone has a copy, and that's the funny thing I always think about a book like this from some creators. They're like more likely known for other things is the fact that it's not like if you go to eBay right now, you probably could type in Dead Romans and buy it for $4.99. Like, it's not like your book is out there selling for $20 on the resale market.
Yeah.
So you
I'm
can
very
get
aware of the reality of the situation. Yeah.
Well, in the future, you got like, once this, but the thing about it is once this is picked up for some other sort of multimedia project, then people will be buying $20 copies on eBay. But I do think it fits that too, just so you know. I think this is great. I also think that I haven't listened to any Mud 79 yet, because obviously you're still working on that. But this also could work for a scripted podcast, I think, too.
I think we are in talks. I'm in talks right now with a British company about adapting it as an audio drama. And I've played the card that I want to write it, because I do that. That's one of my jobs. Yeah. So I'm like, I can write an audio drama for sure. I'll send you Mud 79 the first season if you want it. Like, I've got the first season done. I can send that to you. But June
I love that. Yeah. I mean, June 8th is the day that's dropping, or
yeah, June 8th is when because we did the first season. We did the whole first season, and then I started working on the second season, and then I went back to the first season, which is 12 40-minute episodes, and then I re-voiced it. I did all the voice work again, and then I reproduced it. I redid all the imaging, because I'd like, as you build, you're building this like audio suite of sound effects and staples, and so I was building it, and then I listened to it again. I'm like, it's not bad, like it's pretty deep, but I can make it better. So I just made it better. And then we pulled it with the intent that we'll drop it again with the second season. So on June 8th, we drop 2 episodes, which is like an hour and a half of content. And then we're doing 1 episode a week every Thursday, and that will run for 31 weeks. Jeez. So it's a lot of work, and my wife is very keen for me to be finished, and I will get it done. And I'm really stoked with how it's going. The season 2 premiere is called Somehow They Returned. And which I think is very clever. My wife did not get the joke. She's like, I'm sure it's funny to you and your nerd friends, but I don't really care. She's like, she loves Star Wars.
It's for you and your nerd friends is what this is for. So
exactly. Trust me, babe. This is really important. It's really important stuff here that I'm doing. I'm changing the world.
And so is this released on just like Spotify, Apple, all those places?
Everywhere. Yeah, it's going to be all over, everywhere you get your favorite streaming audio. Yeah, so we're putting it on all the platforms and all the formats that I can get it out to. And
it's a fan-made Star Wars story, basically.
Yeah,
and you're a big fan, but obviously you work in pop culture, but like you're also a fan of Star Wars, as we talked about at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, it's Platoon meets Star Wars. So it's set 5 years after the Clone Wars has ended, and it's this guy who's like 17 years old, and he's on a backwater farming planet, and he doesn't want to be on the farm. And he doesn't think he'll ever make it as a pro Limmy player, which was his dream growing up. And his family all fought for the Republic during the Clone War, because the Trade Federation tried to industrialize their planet, and the Republic came in and drove them off. And so his family fought for the Republic, and in his head, it's just a different flag. That's all it is. It's just a different flag. So they all talk with pride about serving the Republic. So I'm going to go do my part. I'm just going to go do my part. And so then he goes off, and it's not what he thought it was going to be at all. And I don't like this idea that a character needs to be the best from the beginning and needs to have all the answers from the beginning. And that is why I love Ahsoka Tano as a character in Star Wars so very much, because it's such a rare thing when a character starts out and you're just like, oh my God, you're so annoying. You're so irritating. And then you love them because you've watched them make mistakes. You've watched them be wrong. You've watched them grow, and then they learn. And that is what the main character in Mud 79 goes through. They really start out with this, I've got all the answers. And I even wrote it from this perspective of they're cocky and they think they're smarter than everybody, but they're not. And then they learn, and then they grow. And yeah, I think it's a very boots on the ground story is how I would describe it.
That's amazing. I'm looking forward to it. I said and you can give me anything Star Wars now. I feel like 5 or 6 years ago, it's kind of like, yeah, I can watch it, take it or leave it. But now I'm like, my friend Adam, who used to be the co-host here, I'm like literally like reading old novels. I'm reading books. I'm reading all this stuff. Like, just give me more Star Wars. I'm all for it. So let's go both Disney and fan made stuff. I'm all for it for sure. So we'll check that out. Mud79. You're posting it on your Twitter and stuff like that. You just Fearless Fred.
Fearless_Fred.
Under Fred on Twitter and stuff like that. But your day job, quickly, if people who live in Canada can listen to you, is that true?
Yeah, on the radio station Q107.
Ready for this?
Yeah.
So people
You're
always
so
ask
close
me,
to us, though. You're so close.
but so people ask me all the time why I have a Canadian flag. I was born in the United States. I was born in New England. I live in Maine most of my life, a little bit in Massachusetts, New Hampshire. First time our podcast ever ranked on Apple Podcasts was in Canada.
Yeah.
And so I got a little Canadian flag to say thank you to our Canadian friends for listening to the podcast, and I have always had it on here back here for that reason. I don't have an American flag in here because like whatever, but like Canadian flag.
Yeah.
And we're the only country that we've continuously been ranked since the beginning is the Philippines, and I'm still trying to figure that one out.
That's great though. That's awesome.
So I feel like I need to fill some sort of other. I gotta add like flag on the wall here somewhere of all the places we ranked across the country, across the world. But yeah, and then like I said, Fearless Fred, you're on Twitter, and you like to share all your stuff on there, and then the radio and Dead Romans. Pick up Dead Romans and tell your LCS if they can get some more in there, because people could read it for sure and pick up the hardcover.
Yes,
anything else you wanted to throw out there, little Fearless Fred?
No, I think we're good. I want to
Awesome.
come back to talk mud though. We'll go deep in the mud if you want.
I'm cool. So 31 weeks. What is that? So that's June till when? Did you have like
I think we wrap the first week of January.
Okay. I guess I don't have a Star Wars week. We usually do the first week of May, and I would not even joking. If you want to come on there, it's a little bit time. It gives people time to listen to it too. That's a little bit further past, but we can also talk about it sometime. Maybe at the end or the beginning. We'll talk about it again.
Yeah,
we'll figure it out. You'll be back on. You don't like to talk or anything, so it's fine. My wife says the same thing about me. She goes, I know why you started a podcast. It's because you just like to talk. I'm like, yeah, but the problem with podcasts is a lot of times you just have to listen to the other person talk.
Yeah, that's it. I want to talk.
I really appreciate you stopping in and chatting with us. All the best with Dead Romans. I hope people buy thousands and millions of copies of the hardcover as well. So I really appreciate all the success to you, Fred.
Thank you for having me, man. I do appreciate it.